Okay, so the theorist that I chose for this project was George Kelly. I found his theory of personal construct very intriguing. I like the side of psychology where it dives into the person's the how they perceive themselves in the world, and I feel like definitely being able to understand is very intriguing to me. So I found him very interesting. A little bit of an introduction into George Kelly. He was born on April 28th, 1905. He was an only child, so he did move around a lot. He got his bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics from Friends University and Park College. He also has a master's degree in psychology from the University of Kansas. He wrote a thesis on workers' leisure time. He completed a minor study in labor relations, and he was also best known for his personal construct theory. There are a lot of more accomplishments that he did have throughout his lifetime, but I definitely feel like these were the more highlighted ones that I wanted to focus on in this presentation. Excuse me. For his timeline, he was born in, like I said, in April 20th of 1905. Although he wasn't directly affected by World War One, just because he was a bit too young, I did definitely decide to put it in just because I felt that it was definitely interesting. World War One happened between 1914 to 1918. After that, he went ahead and got his doctoral degree in psychology in 1931. After that, the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. He went ahead and wrote a paper that got it published in 1964. World War II happened around 1939 to 1935. And then the Supreme Court did rule segregation in schools is unconstitutional in 1954. He did also live through the Korean War, and he did not live through the entirety of the Vietnam War, but he did live to see the start of it. He also did write The Psychology of Personal Constructs of 1955, and then he did eventually die in 1967. Excuse me. So for the constant moving, I did think this was interesting just because as a growing child, you definitely do need a lot of stability. I think it was definitely interesting how he had to move around a lot when it came to different environments. It was definitely interesting because it was a constant move, so his environment constantly changed, and so did his community. He wasn't directly involved with World War One, but he was still young at the time. But I did think it was definitely interesting because something that big of an event definitely had to have been known to him, you know? And it was interesting because at such a young age, he was interested in social problems. So there's no hard evidence of it, but I did find it interesting that World War One happened around that time where his fond of social problems occurred. So I'm not really sure if it did directly impact it, but I definitely do think it is an interesting topic to at least discuss. He also so what I did find interesting about the constant moving was that it definitely does affect a child. In a study that I found, it said frequent moves even a single move can be especially hard on children and adolescents. Studies show children who move frequently are more likely to have problems at school. So I found this interesting because although he did have a lot of educational accomplishments, he actually never graduated from high school. So this most likely did happen because of the constant movings and the constant changes of community and nature, nature and community. It could have also changed the way he viewed education as something that isn't stable and something that's constantly changing just because of how often he had to change schools and locations as well. So another interesting thing I wanted to go over was the wars. I think wars in general were definitely more affecting to him, but I think the war that affected him the most would probably be World War II. Like I said, he did live through many wars, such as the Korean War and the Vietnam War, but I think he was directly more involved with World War excuse me. He was directly more involved with World War II. He was an aviation psychologist in the Navy, and he likely helped, but this is what likely helped him influence his personal construct theory. When it comes to war, there are a lot of effects on a person's mentally, just because there's a lot of things that people see in wars that definitely affect the way they come home. One of the most common diagnoses that happen when people come home is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, just because there's so much that happens in war that it definitely affects the way people think. In a study, it said second the most common symptoms of PTSD as a possible reaction to highly stressful events are related to psychological hyperarousal and altered reactivity at exposure to trauma-related cues. So what this means is that this can definitely affect the way the person views themselves and the world. The there's a lot of unspeakable things that happens in wars, and when it comes to trying to live back to being a citizen, I think it definitely, there's a disconnection there where people just cannot bring themselves back down to how they used to be. And I think that definitely, George Kelly's involvement in World War II and seeing how it affected the people, I think was definitely what helped him like get more intrigued in the person, like his theory, or start working on his theory at least, to definitely kind of see how these peoples and their individual experiences affected the way they saw the world. So another thing that I did want to bring up was the working reformant. So as I stated earlier, he did help out a lot, or he did write a paper on working leisure, and he was also minor study in labor relations as well. So he was those would definitely do tie into his investment in social problems. So back then, working conditions weren't the best. They were definitely a lot more dangerous than they are now. Many workers were underpaid and undervalued. So this definitely would have affected the way those workers saw themselves. So when the Fair Labor Standard Act was passed, it raised the minimum wage to 25 cents, which allowed for more security and when it came to pay. And what I found interesting was that when there was a quote that said, "Self-esteem can be defined as a person's evaluation of their own worth." Many previous studies have found a small but positive association between income and self-esteem. In other words, individuals with higher income tend to have a higher self-esteem. So what I found interesting was that since George Kelly was not working, but he was studying worker relations, he definitely would have seen how underpaid and undervalued workers saw themselves and how they viewed the world, or as workers who were rightfully paid and actually valued had a different view and definitely had a more positive look in life. I think once he realized that these two different I guess groups of people, once he realized these two different groups of people had different views of the world and of themselves, he definitely would have helped them understand that there's definitely something going on here as to how people view themselves, and how unique events and I guess personal beliefs can affect the way people view the world and themselves. And the last one I wanted to go over today would be the segregation. So he was alive when segregation was ruled unconstitutional. It was the Brown versus Board where they ruled that. Brown versus Board of Education. So racism definitely does shape the way people think of others. It's definitely a issue that we still face today, and it's definitely has its negative impact on the world. When it came to this ruling, it was one of the biggest wins for African American rights. It allowed for a lot of people to begin the conversation of if everyone really is equal. So one quote that I found was that generations of lawsuits seeking greater education of equality since Brown demonstrates that decisions imprint on how courts, lawyers, and policymakers constructed constitutional requirements for educational equity. So this court case ruling impacted the way future cases have ruled on constitutional and segregation, and it's definitely interesting how this one ruling has affected the way people perceive the world and how people perceive something such as segregation. And these are going to be my favorite references, and that was my George Kelly presentation.